Good evening. Welcome to RJ Julia Madison. We are so excited that you joined us tonight for a very special presentation. Tonight we have two extraordinary people that our state and Madison can claim as our own. So we're very proud of that. Tonight's special guest, I'm not sure if he always imagined himself as an author. He has been an executive. He's had an office in a C-suite. He once operated a vintage Good Humor ice cream truck, which is my favorite role. His path, however, has led him to be an agent of change, and he is a champion of mental health awareness. He's also the author that we are here to celebrate tonight. His book, There's Coffee in the Fridge, last week sold 2,000 copies alone in 1 week.
Wow.
Impressive stuff. In addition, he had quite a good week. He had over 1 million views on TikTok.
Wow.
If you're not following him on TikTok yet, you should be. And probably other social media as well. Clearly, his message of hope and mental health awareness, especially for men, has struck a nerve. Tonight, he is in conversation with someone who probably doesn't even need an introduction. Emmy-nominated broadcast journalist Ann Nyberg has been called the face of Connecticut. And she is the reigning royalty of broadcast journalism. We are very proud to have her here tonight and so excited to meet her. Ann is also a dedicated philanthropist, and she's an entrepreneur in her own right. Her store, Annie Mame, is right here in Madison. So check that out as well. Little plug for that. You're thrilled to have you joining us tonight. Please help me welcome James, Francis, and Ann Nyberg.
It's my pleasure to be with you here tonight because we're talking about something that is, the world's a crazy place right now, right? So divided. Kids, lots of anxiety, and then they grow up to be adults with anxiety. Jim and I know each other, and he asked me to write the foreword to this book, which I did do. And I'm just going to read it to you because I think it sets the scene for what this is all about. And we'll have a discussion, and then we'll ask for questions afterward. And anything goes, because we just need to talk about this. As in the iconic holiday movie, It's a Wonderful Life, we all have a purpose. Jim found his purpose in writing his story to save others, to save men. It is often difficult for one to see purpose when desperately fighting through clouds of doubt and despair. Some never know their worth, but Jim found it before it was too late. He drove ever so close to the brink, but got pulled back. What was it that saved him? A God wink, his wife, and kids, one last iota of inner strength. Purpose, love, just enough caring about oneself to know that, yes, you matter, even at the very last minute. Life is messy. It's not a straight line. There are bumps and bruises, heartache. We weave our way through. Men who don't often spill their guts to others over coffee like women can do with such ease get permission to look deeply into their life, their soul, through this life lived. Jim knows he is now a helper. He feels it deeply. His mission is to make the sun come up another day for anyone who reads his story. Purpose, pass it on. So we're going to start this conversation. And this book, for those of you who have not read it, pick it up. It is raw. It is real. It will shake you. And you may find yourself in it or somebody you know to help somebody. It's about helping. All right, Jim, there's coffee in the fridge. Why is it titled that?
First of all, thanks everybody for coming. I know it's Wednesday night, it's cold, and really appreciate you taking time to spend some time with us. So it's coffee in the fridge is fairly simple, right? We all are trying to achieve these great goals, right? These things that we think we need to strive for. But it's the magical moments that happen in an infinitesimal second that matter. those are the things that I look at and say, holy shit, this is magical. And that's what There's Coffee in the Fridge is. My wife and I had an interchange. It's explained very granularly in the book about going on a business trip. I had attempted suicide. I was in the hospital. I came out of the hospital. I went through an evolution. I was getting ready to go back to work. And the first business trip I was going to take on a plane in many years. And I was very nervous, very anxious. And at the time, my wife's a night owl. I'm more of a morning person. And I was going to get up at 4 a.m. go to the airport. And I was getting ready to go, and you'll read my book, and I'm pretty neurotic, right? So I'm like planning everything, getting everything organized. And I said, hey, I made some coffee. I put it in the fridge. I'm going to get up early and go to the airport. And so I figured I'd just get up and leave, right? And I tiptoed around the bed, 4 o'clock in the morning, and my wife turned to me with a big smile. Whew. Sorry.
It's okay. I told you it's raw and it's
So
real.
this story hits me every time. And my wife's in the room, so. And she said, there's coffee in the fridge, big smile on her face. And I was like, man, that was all I needed. And I carried that with me for my entire trip. And I've carried it with me since that day. Because that's what life is. It's those small moments. It's not the big stuff that we're striving for, right? We all want to be seen. And in that moment, I was seen. That's magic.
So, Jim, on the outside, you had it all, right? Good job, family, life, the whole thing. How hard was it for you to keep up that when inside this was a mess?
It was very hard. So I was already depressed a lot of the time, not all of the time, but much of the time. And I suffered from pretty severe anxiety. So think about the fact that if you looked at me from the outside, you'd say, man, this guy's got it all, just like you said, right? But inside, I knew that I was a complete imposter, that nothing mattered to me because I was so unhappy. I was so miserable. And it chewed me up day by day by day. It's virtually impossible to live in that state.
How do you think you got there in the first place? So anxiety ridden, so depressed. What happened?
Well, part of the story, and I think this is important, is going back and trying to find the root cause and understanding who you are. And so I spent a lot of time really doing that, going back to my childhood and really trying to define where it was that happened and the things that were in me that caused these things to occur. And that's how it happened. And it happens gradually over time, and then you repress it, right? As a young boy, I was a great athlete. And so that's where I got all my accolades on the field, on the court. And I got all of this praise, but I never got any real sort of emotional connection. And so as a kid and as a boy and then as a man, you just push those things aside and you just keep going, right? And you think, well, I'm going to strive for these goals. These are the things I want to do. I want to make a lot of money. I want to buy a big house. I want to have a beautiful wife. I want to have amazing kids. And then you realize that if you're not in love with yourself, then you literally have nothing.
All right. So what happened that you almost didn't come back?
So I tell a story in the book about the first time that I wanted to commit suicide, that I consciously thought about being suicidal. I was 12 years old. And I had gone through this periods of time where I was suicidal, probably 10 or 15 times from the time I was 12 until the time I was 40-ish. And, things happen along the way that prevent you from actually taking that last step, thankfully. But I believed wholeheartedly that the world would be a better place if I was not in it. And I think that is ultimately what drove me to want to end it, and I finally had just said, I can't do this anymore. I was 40 years old. I was tired. I had had enough of trying to hide what I was actually feeling. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't understand it. And so that's what ultimately pushed me on that day to say, you know what, I've had enough. I'm finished. I have to end this. I can't do this anymore.
Let's talk about that day.
What do you want to talk about? So so May 5th, 2005, it was a Thursday. And I was in my office was in downtown New Haven, overlooking the green. And on May 5th, I was stressed out and anxious. And I was so nervous of just in general. I couldn't get past it. I just could not get past it. And I went home that night, and Chris and I, my wife Chris and I, had a conversation about life. And in that conversation, I think I said, look, I'm really sad. I'm really depressed. And Chris said, she knows me better than anybody. I mean, we've been together since we were in college. And she knew that I was down, and she had known that I had been depressed, but didn't realize how bad it really was. Because of that conversation, I felt like I had explained to her that I couldn't do this anymore. I clearly didn't say that, but that's in my head what I thought I said. I woke up the next morning on the 6th, I went to work, and I spent the entire day till about 2 o'clock sitting in my office trying not to jump out the window. I was consciously telling myself, don't jump out the window. And I finally just said, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I'm going to kill myself. And I left the office with the intention of driving off the road, off of 95. And so that's ultimately what happened. I had decided that I had had enough. I couldn't do it anymore. The pain was too great. There was an event about buying a new computer. I didn't have a lot of money. We were working through this build of a business. So all the stresses of that were happening. I was on my way to coach lacrosse. We had like 110 kids here at the town campus waiting for me to coach this clinic. And I just was like, I can't do this. I cannot be me anymore. I cannot pretend to be happy. And so I got in the car and I was driving up 95, and I won't get into the details because it is in the book, but I had decided to call my wife, and she never answers her cell phone. This is back, 2005, still early days, right? There were no smartphones. It was basically a flip phone. And I thought, well, if she doesn't answer the phone, I'm just going to leave her a message. I'm just going to say, goodbye. I've had enough. I'm leaving. And I was crying, and snot was running down my face, and I couldn't see. And I was going 125 miles an hour at the Leeds Island exit on 95, looking for a rock to drive into. I was consciously trying to do this. I called, and she picked up the phone on the first ring, and I was like, damn it. And I said, listen, I'm just calling to say goodbye. I've had enough. Can't do this anymore. So imagine that, right? She's in the house. Kids came home from school. They're all running around. Your husband's telling you he's going to kill himself. The crazy thing about that moment was my sister, who also happens to be here tonight, hadn't been to my house in 2 years. Lived in Princeton, New Jersey. She was a dean at Princeton University. Was behind me on the highway. Had no idea that she was coming. Literally called my wife while I was on the phone with her, and she said, hold on, Jim's in crisis. He's on the phone. And my sister said, where is he? And she told her I was at Leeds Island. She was a mile behind me on the highway. Hadn't been in my house in 2 years. They talked me off the road, and I wound up at the Goose Lane exit, and they took me down to Yale Psych, and that was that. That was the end of the beginning of the end. Yes.
I will tell you, when you read this in the book, your heart is racing. It is just racing, and what he just told you is all true, and you can just imagine what that was. Had you tried to seek help before this, or are you the guy that I can handle this, I'm not going to get help, I don't need to talk to anybody? How did you handle that coming up through your manhood?
My mom brought me to a psychiatrist when I was 11. And I remember it very vividly, feeling that I was broken. There was something wrong with it. And I immediately pushed it away, and I didn't want to be involved. And that was sort of the beginning of the repression for me in terms of deciding whether I wanted to go to therapy or not. Then another 7 years goes by. I'm 18. I went to see another psychiatrist that my sister had recommended. And then no, after that, nothing. I had gone to a couple of different coaching sessions along the way, but no, I powered through like every man that I know does.
And that's a great point. Why don't men seek help?
I think they're afraid to have license to admit vulnerability. I work in a very alpha environment. I work with guys that are former athletes, running companies, have made a lot of money, And they're afraid to say, I'm sad, I need help, something's not right. Because if you admit vulnerability, then you are vulnerable, right? And I think that that's ultimately why men don't seek help. The reality is that if a man does that, if he raises his hand and says, oh my God, I can't do this, I'm sad, I need some help, that's courage. Like, that's real strength, right? Going the other side of that, it's not strength, it's weakness. And so, and I see it as a weakness. I understand it. I mean, it's common. It's a very common. But I want to give men the opportunity to have this conversation.
All right, since the book has been out, men have read it. What has been the response?
I have been, I shouldn't say overwhelmed, but I have been pleasantly surprised at the number of men that have contacted me directly and said, I have felt this way for so long, and I'm just afraid to go to therapy. I don't want to get labeled. The response from men has been remarkable. And I know that now we all want to be seen, right? And men want help. They want to be able to say, I need some help.
In particular, have you helped somebody come back from the brink?
Yeah, there's a couple of people that for sure I have definitely helped pretty deeply.
Describe that.
There's a guy that I worked with very early on in my career in Manhattan. That worked down on Wall Street, and we became very good friends. You know, as much as people who are detached and disconnected can be, just sort of guys doing what guys do. And I saw him about 15 years ago. So this was after I had been in the hospital, and you know, we had a conversation, and I told him what had happened, and he said, you know, I feel this exact same way. And he went to therapy. I actually recommended a therapist for him, and he spent 3 years seeing this guy, and he said that basically that event saved his life. He was going to kill himself.
How do we fix this man thing? How do we fix it? I mean, you have a book, you're talking about it, you're not mincing words here. How do we fix this? How do we fix this so it's okay to get help?
I think it starts with something simple, just like a conversation. That's literally, it needs to be simple. One of the things that I preach and talk about with people is just start small, right? There's 10 things that I have on my roadmap to health. I'm not saying do all 10 of them, right? Do one, do two. So start small. Let's just start a conversation. It's okay for a man to say, can you talk to me? I need some help. And I think once that becomes more comfortable and men start exercising this muscle, right, this emotional muscle, it becomes a lot easier. I think the other thing is, so I coach high school lacrosse. I coach at Daniel Land, and so I'm with 15 to 18-year-olds every day in the spring. And I really connect with these kids in a way that, forget about lacrosse. Like there's three things that I'm an expert in. One is loving my family, 2 is loving myself, and 3 is the world of lacrosse. And so I am very comfortable in that environment. But I also see the toxic behavior that exists, right, in youth sports. I was the president of Madison Youth Lacrosse, and it's good because we're in Madison, so contextually it makes sense. I was the president of Madison Youth Lacrosse. I coached lacrosse in town since 1994. I was part of the problem because I didn't know what I didn't know. And, it's a very aggressive environment for young boys, and they are young boys. They are little boys. They're terrified. That's where it has to start. So I want to start this conversation with men so that men feel open and honest and clear about how they want to be. So they can take that to boys, right? They can take that to kids that are 6, 7, 8, 15 years old and teach them what it means to role model real men.
It is said that those closest around us know change. Did your wife know what was going on, or you just really did a good job of hiding?
No, I mean, she knew that I wasn't happy, and we would have conversations all the time. And I do talk about this in the book, where Chris is generally a happy person, right? And it used to infuriate me because she was so happy, and I just didn't get it. And I wanted to tap into that, but I couldn't get there, and I just didn't understand what that really meant. She knew that I wasn't happy. I mean, she was in it, but we didn't have the language or the understanding of how deep it really went. And I think that was also part of the issue for me, right? Is is that I did not have the language to understand what was actually happening when this was going on. Plus, life happens, right? We came up here, we bought a big house, we had children, so 3 kids running around. You throw yourself into activities, right? I was coaching lacrosse, she was running the arts barn, and we were going to parties and having dinner parties, and so life just keeps going, and you keep moving quickly enough, you don't have to pay attention to it. And so I think that her happiness for herself was great, and she knew that I was not happy, but she didn't understand. I don't think she fully understood the depths of it.
What do you say to people who have been through, I mean, you're feeling blue, you're feeling down, and people will just say, snap out of it. Snap out of it.
I love that. I love that, because I was actually just going to make a video. So now I'm this TikTok star, right? Which is absolutely insane, because I haven't been on TikTok until Wednesday of last week. So I had this social media people out that are in LA, and it's not fancy or anything. She's from Madison, a very good friend of the family. And so they are handling my social media, right? So she's like, what do you think if I put some stuff up on TikTok? I'm like, whatever, I don't know what TikTok is. My daughter's on it. So Wednesday, she calls me and says, hey, there's 1 million people that watched this video. And I was like, holy shit, you gotta be kidding me. So I downloaded TikTok on my phone, I get in there and I start watching it. And it's mind-boggling, the power of social media, the comments. So I was watching this happen Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I'm reading these comments from people, and it's like, I like to joke around about things. This topic is very serious, and it's serious to the core of my being. And so when I joke around about it, I'm not trying to make light of it, but I do think that these topics are important, but they're not taboo, right? So I want everybody to understand that. But I'm reading these comments from so many people. I'm talking about thousands of people. My father committed suicide. My uncle committed suicide. My brother committed suicide. I wish my father had read this before he took his life. I'm going to give this book to every man I know. And that is just incredibly powerful. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to do.
Snap out of it. What is it?
So, thank you.
I'm bringing it back.
This is where I was going. I started to make a video yesterday, right? Sometimes I get up in the morning, I go to the surf club, I run sprints. It's not very fast. It's scary how slow I am now. But this thing popped into my head about just be happy. Why can't you just be happy, right? That's what people will say. Like if my mom was here right now, my mom's a magical person. She would say to me, well, Jimmy, just be happy. You're a happy guy. You're a good looking guy. You're smart. You just be happy. You know what? All right. Well, we're in RG, Julia, and I'm not going to drop an F-bomb, but I almost did.
I'm here.
Okay.
You know what? That is the worst advice you could ever give somebody. So instead of just be happy, tell me what's going on. And not only just tell me what's going on, but I would like to have a conversation with you, and I'm not going to say anything. I am just going to listen. I am here to listen. No judgment. I will not respond. I will not make a face. You tell me when you're finished. Conversation's over. To me, that is the most important first step that anybody could do for anybody, right? But especially for men. I'm not here to respond. I am just here to listen. You talk. I think that's critically important, and I think that gets past the just be happy.
I think you hit it on the head. Shut up and listen. Just listen.
Yeah.
Let somebody talk.
I like that.
All right. So you've written the book. You're helping people. How are you these days? How's your family these days?
So my family's great. And I don't mean that in sort of a general way, that there's no traffic, the weather's great, my family's great. No, my family is great. We have all lived through this very traumatic experience. When I was in the hospital, my oldest daughter was 12, my next daughter was 10, my son was 6. We all lived through this together, right? It was my wife's suggestion when I came out of the hospital. She was like, look, we can decide to sweep this under the rug and say you were away on business. Nobody would ever know. We can kind of just figure out what happens next, or we can jump into this and evolve together. And that's ultimately what we did. And so as the kids got older and it became appropriate based on their ages to start having a deeper conversation, We all went to therapy over the next 10, 12, 13 years. My son's still in therapy, right? But I don't call it therapy, we call it coaching, right? I have an accountant for my taxes. I have a doctor for my heart. I got a coach for my mental and emotional well-being. And so my family has lived through this together and have all evolved as people. And I will tell you, they are impressive. My kids are impressive people. My wife is just, it's just an incredibly impressive person. So I was always the identified problem, right? I was always the identified patient. And when this happened, obviously, I was basically jumping up and down. I am the patient. I made that a reality. But as I started to get well, then she was able to let go and not be the one that had to be the driving force behind everything. And so then she started to work on the things that she needed to work on. So at the end of the day, today, we are a very well-rounded and balanced unit. And it's been really impressive to watch. And so I'm doing great. I feel very happy. I think the most important word I would use is just, I'm at peace. I'm very peaceful.
When was the first day that you got peace? Do you remember that? And thinking to yourself, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to keep checking myself. Do you remember a day? Do you remember something that said, I'm going to be okay?
Yeah, it was probably about 3 years after I got out of the hospital. And we were Chris and I were in a therapy session together. And I remember being down on my knees, crying and sobbing. And she's next to me, same thing. And coming out of that session, we got in the car and drove home, and I knew we were going across the bridge in Portland, right? That bridge that runs across Portland into Route 9.
A bridge again.
Yeah. This time I had no plans to drive off the bridge. And I just knew in that moment that life was going to be magical from then on, and it has been.
You brought up something. When you're in a relationship with somebody and you're depressed, you're anxiety ridden, and the other person just cannot wrap their head around what that is, oftentimes they don't know how to help because they don't get it, right? So you've got two people, one's really hurting, the other one is trying to help it. So how do you do that? How does a happy person try to figure out how to help you? Because they're not in it.
Right. And they really can't. It has to be up to the person who's sick, right? Who's diseased to say, okay, I need help. I want to be helped. That's ultimately what has to happen. It's two people in a relationship, and I am me and she is she, and we also have this common relationship together, right? So there's 3 units there. There's nothing anybody else that I could do for anybody, right? I could say to Brian, hey, you know what? I want to help you right now. But if he doesn't want to help himself, there's nothing I can do about it. And that's ultimately the situation we were in.
In your need to help others, I would argue that in this day and age, that people don't pay attention to other people. They're not listening. They're not hearing. I can almost, because I have anxiety and depression in my family too, I can almost look across a room and know when someone is in trouble. Can you identify that too?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think you bring up a good point. I teach people that I work with to listen to hear and not listen to respond. We are a society that listens to respond, or we don't even listen, we just respond, right? You're in a conversation with somebody and they're talking as you're finishing your sentence. And that is the ultimate opposite of seeing someone. And so I think listening to hear is a critical skill that needs to be taught.
Mental health is everything. The fact that we have, I don't want to tell anybody, or I don't want to say this. I'll shout it from the rooftops. Somebody needs help, get them help. You break your arm, you get a cast, just as you brought up, right? So mental health is everything. And you can look at this world and that's the first thing we cut, right? Got to cut mental health services. I know a number of folks who are trying to get help for their kids. They either can't afford it or it's not there, right? We need to stop with all of this.
Agreed.
And just in summing up, because I know you have questions, I can read faces. I'm pretty good. I'm right on the mark.
You might have a future in
What would you say in summation? I think this book is terrific. It's great. Are there downsides to you telling your story as well that you've had to kind of wince at?
I think the biggest downside is that I share this story with other people, right? I have children that my oldest daughter is married, so she has a spouse. Obviously, I have a spouse. We all live this together. And so I'm willing to step up, and they've given me license to come out and tell this story, but it's their story too. And so that's what's hard. Like we had a conversation this morning about, you know, does the book make you sad? And is it going to be hard tonight to hear some of this stuff? And no matter how many times I talk about it, when Chris is in the room, I get emotional. And so I think that's probably the biggest downside, right? Is that I had this impact, this negative impact on people. The upside is that I had this negative impact on people in my life, right? If I didn't experience what I experienced and learn what I learned and evolve the way that I've evolved, I couldn't have answered your question about whether everybody's good, because they wouldn't have been good, right? And so that to me is the ultimate positive. And what I'm trying to do, again, I'm trying to start a conversation. It's really that simple. I want people to talk about this stuff, because I have met so many people who have relatives that have suicided, and they say, damn, I wish I had talked about this before this person killed themselves. You don't get that chance, right? It's a permanent solution to temporary issues. And if you had said to me when I was 38, 39 years old, that I would be sitting here right now having this moment in this day, I would have said there's no effing way. There's no way. I could never live a day like that. And so if I can experience a day like today, that is just unbelievable. And so that's what I'm trying to get people to realize.
And people need to know they have worth.
100%.
All right, Jim. Thank you. Now, questions?
I just want to make a comment.
Sure.
I think you have so much courage to be able to get in front of us and talk about it.
Yeah.
But I read the book, and the book was honest, direct. It was so Long Island, where I'm from, that I loved it.
Yes, it is.
Yes, so I could relate to the car situation, having a bum car that's stuck on the road and racing back with your girlfriend. But I give you a lot of credit, and I work in the health field, and there are a lot of people that have issues that are even working in the health field that need help. I worked with an anesthesiologist that committed suicide. That man let me go to see Katie when she was in first grade. Katie is my daughter, okay? No one was going to her play, and she was going to be a princess. It was Grandparents' Day, and she was so sad that no one was attending, and I had to work. That day, I had a gap in the schedule for 3 hours, so this man, who was our chief, told me I could go see her. So I did. And when I walked in, she had her star, and she turned around and she said, "Mom, you're here." And she went on with the lead of the play. When she went to college, she turned around and she said, "You know what, Mom? You know what I'm thinking of now? That play in first grade. You know what I was thinking of? The man that let me go and told me that I didn't have to come back to work because my daughter I should spend the day with."
Yeah.
That man ultimately ended up committing suicide,
Mm.
and his life was turned upside down from many other things that I won't get into. But I was so hurt by it. But he changed my life, and a memory that she had.
That's
You
great.
know, it's oftentimes the people who are most sad, they help others.
Yes,
They
Yes.
constantly,
I
Robin
agree.
Williams said the same thing.
I agree.
They constantly help others, try to make others happy, and they're not whole inside.
Yes,
That happens all the
I
time.
agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Right. Jim was my lacrosse, you were my lacrosse coach in 8th grade.
I
was
remember
he
that.
good?
Oh, he played with us. And I've seen you over the years, all these years, we've seen each other. And I think it's important that I need to look out about this because, you know, I look up to you, I still do. And it's getting more difficult for our children. You know, I have a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old, so it's more difficult for them than it was for us. Because there's so much social media and the connections we make. It's also easier to reach out though, to get help.
How old are you?
40.
40. Do you know other 40-year-old men who need help that aren't getting it?
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. I'm one. And others, absolutely. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad you said that.
And so
Others.
just to be here today, just a quick review. It's just great to be here and to have it be about mental health is really important to all of us.
People need to care about other people. We forgot how to do that. What is wrong with us? What is wrong with us?
The other thing I want to mention too is that if we taught children right now, every kid from 6 to 12 how to meditate, we would literally eliminate violence in the world in a generation. It would be gone.
Why do you say that? What is it about meditation? I don't understand.
When you get into a meditative state, right, a conscious ongoing meditation practice, it forces you, or brings you to a place of peace. And you want to stay in that space. Right. And I'm not saying that I'm not Buddha, right? I still get pissed off and aggravated, especially when I drive. It really drives me crazy. But yeah, and people I work with rub me the wrong way. And, you know, I'm just like everybody else. But when I sit and meditate, I come out of that just completely calm. Like there's no arguing at that point. What are you going to argue about? It's just be calm, relax. One of the things that bothers me about the world, and Matt brings up a good point, that you know, we are so disconnected. And if you want to see mindlessness, right? I like to practice mindfulness, being aware of what's happening in every moment when I can. But if you want to see mindlessness and how people are literally not in the moment, go stand on the corner of 79 and Route 1, right? When that light turns red, people will roll to the light and go right through it. They will not stop for a second and take a look and see what's coming the other way. They just keep going. And that is complete mindlessness. And that is pervasive in everything that we do. We are in such a rush all the time. And so I teach people to slow down. If you want to really be creative and produce and speed up, well, slow down.
Others, yes.
So I work for e-services in town, and I'm really glad that you're bringing everything that you're talking about is so critical. And I just know from my job and doing a lot of work with young people, particularly boys, we are so far outpaced by the cultural factors that are sort of weighing everything that you're saying. And it makes me mad because I can remember having conversations when I was younger, and it's worse now. It's worse in terms of the forces on boys to live up to this kind of stereotype. And what we're doing to girls as well. It's not a healthy culture at all at this point. So I'm really glad that you're pointing that out. And I think boys need role models like yourself. Yeah, when people like me talk to boys in groups, because that's part of my job. If I'm not an athlete and I don't look like the big burly guy that they sort of would imagine they want to be, it's hard for them to hear the message. So athletes and adult men need to have these conversations with boys to make an impact. And I'd be love to talk with you further if there's things we can do. I do have a question though. I'm curious because you sound like somebody who interacted with therapists, psychiatrists. And if I could have directed you when you were a kid, I would have said, don't go to a psychiatrist. Find somebody who will talk to you, not talk at you. I'm just curious as to what turned it around for you in therapy. Like, what was it somewhere in a process that started to click with you? Like, what did therapy look like for you that was really helpful?
That's a great question. So when I got out of the hospital, you know,
How long were you in the hospital?
a couple of weeks. You know, you don't just leave an acute care unit that literally is locked down, right? I mean, I was in one flew over the cuckoo's nest, and you don't just leave and like go out into the world, right? They transition you and they recommend people and refer people. And so I was referred to a a social work, I don't know if he was a psychologist or what, in Brantford. And he was great, you know, he was good for me for about 6 or 8 months. And then he finally just said, I can't help you. I just can't. You know, you're too smart and I can't do this anymore. You have to find somebody else. And so what clicked for me was finding someone who was referred to me by a friend who was a specialist in depression, sexual abuse, and a couple of other modalities, but she covered the gamut of things. So it wasn't just like sitting down and having a conversation. It was one session was Reiki, another session was meditation, another session was talk therapy. And so I think that from the way my brain works, having that variety and for her to be intuitively tapped into what I needed was what pushed me over the top. The other thing was, look, I tried to kill myself. I wanted to be dead. And the alternative to that was you've got to get better. And I made a decision with my wife's support that I was going to get better. I was going to finally solve this issue about wanting to be happy and finding happiness. And so what I decided to do was to approach my mental and emotional health the way that I approached my athletics. Because when I was training to be a lacrosse player, when I was little, I would get on the wall and just throw the ball 100 times a day, right? Nonstop. And so that's ultimately what I did. I took that same discipline into my therapy, and that's where it sort of clicked.
Thank you.
And what's really strange, for those of you who don't know about this, is that anxiety and depression go together. They sound like two different things. They go together.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Because I want to give him, yes, go ahead.
Do you take medication and what are your thoughts on it?
Great question. I am no longer on medication. I did take medication for about 8 years. And I did not want to be on medication. It was one of the reasons why I wanted to die, because I knew in my head that I needed medication and I didn't want to be labeled and I didn't want to take it forever, right? But it's like a button that gets pushed that was so good for me to have the medication, right? It eliminates the highs and it eliminates the lows and it allows you to stay focused. I think medication is phenomenal, taken in the right setting, right? Taken with a professional's guidance and support. And if it works for you, I think that's awesome.
And it's also medical. If your reuptake inhibitors aren't working in your brain, then you have to balance that, right?
Yeah, and your brain becomes so habitual when you're not on medication that it becomes addicted to the fact that, you know, it's broken. And so that's what you feed off of. So I think medication's great.
2 more questions. Yes.
So I'm just curious because you mentioned being like a really good athlete, having a beautiful home, wonderful kids, a loving wife. So it seems like everything that would make somebody happy you had. So was it like, were there things that happened that made you sad, or was it just like underlying, you couldn't put your finger on it?
Yeah, so that is a great question. First of all of those things that you just talked about are very surface level things, right? I love having a nice house. I love having a phenomenal family, but if I don't get out of bed and look in the mirror and love myself, I'm screwed. Nothing else matters, right? Literally. But ultimately, I forgot what I was going to do.
There were things in your past that led up to
So
this.
in the book, I talk about going back and tracing my trauma. So Terry just talked a little bit about the car that broke down when I was younger. My car broke down. I was walking home from work. I was 17 years old. I was jumped by 4 guys and almost beaten to death. So that trauma I carried with me. That was one of the traumas, right? There's a couple of more traumas in the book that I talk about, but I think that ultimately that trauma creates this imprint on you. And that is what I carried forward, which fed into my depression. So both of my parents were clinically depressed. So I ultimately had the gene, right? And then these traumas happened on top of that, which made my depression worse. And so I tried to avoid that by just moving forward. Successful career, successful athlete, you know, the big house, all that stuff. And all it did was mask the pain that was happening underneath me. Eventually that pain will come out. And it did.
Another question.
Last
Yes.
question?
Oh,
Yeah, I was gonna say last.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Jim, I wonder if you could talk about this. There's what I see as a misconception about suicide, where people will comment after and say what a selfish thing that was. He had children. I've worked as a psychiatric nurse and I've spoken to many people who have attempted suicide, and I don't think I can think of any that didn't say, I thought everyone would be better off.
They were trying to get out of the pain.
Yeah, no,
They actually believe
Yes,
everybody in their life
100%.
will be relieved.
Yes, that I talk about in the book pretty extensively. I did believe that the world would be a better place without me, and specifically that my kids would be better off with me not being there, because I wanted to break the cycle of this illness, and I thought breaking the cycle would mean taking myself out instead of breaking through.
So what do we say to people then? You know, just should we? I think that I'm really like aware of it. So I tell the people in my life all the time how important they are to everyone around them. But is that enough?
That's a real big story.
That is. Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head in some ways, in that every single person is different, right? And these illnesses manifest themselves in ways that are different in almost every. And so it's really trying to get to a point where you can see the person so they can see themselves and help them work through whatever the specific thing is. The last thing I want to say too about trauma is trauma, right? I don't care if you were beaten by 4 guys and left for dead, or if you were sexually abused, or just slapped in the face once. It creates an energy imprint on your soul, at a cellular level. And so the volume and aggressiveness of the trauma isn't really important. It's that the trauma actually happened. And then you carry that with you. And I think a lot of people, they'll read my story and they'll say, oh my God, this guy, he went through all these issues. But everybody's got issues. Everybody's got stuff that they need to go in and embrace, right? And literally hug that pain and hug whatever that trauma was, and then let it go. And so I think that's important, is an important part of the process.
All right, let's thank Jim for